Yeah.
Hey, welcome to the latest episode of the Wellbeing Show. Got a great guest, Thom Dennis, with us, and he's going to be talking about later about his book, Rewilding the Corporate Mind. Timely sort of introduction to this, and we'll get to know him a little bit. Before we jump into it, though, just to remind you, this is pre-recorded, although it might seem live. So don't message me or call me while you're watching it. You might get a grumpy old man instead of a really nice host. But do send me messages on 07506 319 745. That's enough from me. Hey, Tom, how you doing?
I'm good, Noel. Thank you. It's good to be with you.
It's good to have you here as well. I was going to say good to be with you, and then I'm like, oh yeah, this modern world where we're in some sort of online room together. It all feels very intimate, doesn't it? It's very strange this world. So not sure I've really caught up with it, but there you go. Thanks for joining us. And you're up in, is it Yorkshire?
I'm in York. York's, yes.
York.
Yes,
Okay,
the
York's
city of
very
York.
beautiful.
Everybody says that. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is.
Well, York Minster is pretty spectacular, I seem to remember. And I remember York itself being very
Yeah,
pretty.
when we open the windows and the wind is blowing in the right direction, you can hear the bells of the Minster.
Can you?
Yeah,
Can you?
actually, yeah, and on a Thursday they do bell ringing practice, so that's quite fun.
Wow, I bet that's actually really good. I wouldn't mind going listening to that, to be honest. So is that where you were born and brought up? Is it York?
I was born in Walton-on-Thames in Surrey, so I was a Surrey boy. Went to school there, and my first jobs were there.
Okay. And what
Yeah.
was that like being down there, down south, and growing up in that sort of it? All sounds very nice to me.
Well, yes, of course, one doesn't have a comparator when you're young. You just experience what you experience.
Right.
But I think I was very privileged and lucky to have the upbringing and that sort of I won't say atmosphere, but it's more than that. It's the whole arena in which one was. I went to boarding school, and that was a different matter.
Okay. Well, what was that like? I mean, we hear different stories from different people. What was your experience of being in boarding school like?
Um, I think it split me in lots of ways.
Did it?
Yeah, the headmaster was um, a very unpleasant fellow
Hmm.
who rejoiced in corporal punishment, uh, and but the buildings were beautiful and the grounds were beautiful, and the sport was amazing. So
Yeah.
it's like there were these huge rhododendron um, woods almost, and they had the Cubs and Scouts and that in all of that, and it was great. It was beautiful. But in terms of being a young student in that um, atmosphere,
Hmm.
that was not good. That was not
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult for people to, I think, who are not from our generation to realize that teachers used to use violence against students. I seem to remember my teachers using violence and that being perfectly reasonable. It was thought of as perfectly reasonable at the time,
Mm.
which I don't remember experiencing it as reasonable at all, to be honest. We normalized it as you do, but it wasn't reasonable. I suppose the other boys just picked up on that, and you had some sort of hierarchy of bullying and things like that, and top dog got to bully.
That I don't remember
Okay.
particularly. At public school, yes. Prep school, no. Prep school, all the violence came from the headmaster, and there was plenty of it. And
Yeah.
it was a, it was in a place. Actually, the other thing was that the food was very good.
Yeah.
So you talk about normalizing. I think
Yeah.
I certainly use food as my security blanket,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but no, there was real fear running through the place.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't remember boys. It was a boys' school. and bullying in that sense. As I say, there was later on at the next school, but
Okay.
not.
Yeah. It's interesting looking back on those days, and there seems to be sort of two ways people think about those experiences. One, which I'm not quite sure what I think about, where it goes, well, it didn't do me any harm. Like, did it not? And then the other going, well, I'm not sure I would do it to my children anymore. So I don't know which way you went on that one. I presume on the I wouldn't do it to my own children.
Well, I think they're not mutually exclusive. Those. Um, I, I think that being sent away at the age of 8 for most children is pretty traumatizing.
Yeah.
Layer onto that a fear laden environment, and you're meting out a trauma that will affect people for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And I think yes, some people dealt with it better than others. I've got one or two. Um, well, actually, just one now. I think the other guy died during COVID. Um, not a deep friend, but somebody that I speak to from time to time. And I think he dealt with it probably better. But then again, he was a very gifted musician. So I think he led a much more favored life.
Hmm.
Um, and it is amazing how many people, having gone through that, say, well, it didn't do me any harm, and therefore my children will go through the same. Except, of course, life has changed somewhat in that strata, but there are others where, a lot of the schools for disabled and disadvantaged children, I think they're still experiencing some pretty horrendous things. So it carries on.
Yeah. I mean, there are various forms of institutional care, of which those types of schools were one and still exist. Sort of, and I've worked with people from those types of backgrounds, and people who are currently in those types of schools now. And although the sort of care models have changed, there's still that fundamental issue about an institutional care and how to manage that in people. And although I don't think now it is normal to have corporal or I was going to say capital, we don't do capital punishment, but normal to have corporal punishment. It's not normal anymore. Still exists, as you say, in institutional care, and it happens for disabled people. And up until recently, for example, if you were neurodiverse, you could find yourself locked away under the Mental Health Act. I mean, this year it changed, but there you could have your rights taken away. There is growing evidence, though, isn't there, that this type of communal care or institutional care from schools does have lasting and lifelong negative effects, and sort of the way it creates fear in the brain and a fear-based response. You mentioned food as well. It's a very common way of managing and coping, I think, in particularly children that are afraid. And certainly from our generation, sugar, for example, was thought of as a good thing. We wouldn't necessarily think of it as a good thing anymore. In fact, they're bringing in taxes to reduce the amount of sugar. But certainly, I grew up with a generation where you were given a cake if you were upset, and you're encouraged to take a bottle of Lucozade with you to hospital, which is, of course, liquid sugar or diluted sugar. So I don't think that would be so much encouraged. Did
I
you
think
struggle with food? Was it an issue throughout your life?
I think I carried on that sense of eating for comfort. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's interesting you talk about sugar and that. I think they say now that um, almost all children by the age of 3 are addicted to sugar.
Yeah. I
Um,
don't know the exact stats, but it certainly is a massive problem at the moment. We've got a
mm,
significant
yeah,
problem with obesity in the UK, as they have in America, and sugar as an addition to food that you wouldn't think it's in. Is
Well,
a
it's in
really,
everything pretty
I
much.
know it's people just don't
All
know.
processed food. Salt and
Absolutely.
sugar, both of which are, bad for you.
Incredibly bad for you. And it's I mean, in terms of the addictive nature of it, it's certainly moreish and something that people want. Whether it fits the same definition of addiction as other substances is, but it certainly has a an effect of soothing people who are upset. And it's we are genetically programmed to want carbohydrates because of our previous past as feast famine type animals.
Yeah, but I think the purveyors of these fast food things. I'm trying to think of what's those kind of crisps that come in a tube?
The Pringles.
Pringles.
Yeah.
So they are coated with something which actually affects the brain in such a way that you've had one and you must have another.
Yeah.
Um, and it's one of the clearest examples because I mean, I have certainly experienced that. You have one, I've got to have another one. And I just thought it was because it tasted good, but actually, no. I mean, you are succumbing to a a recipe that's been specifically designed to
Yeah.
make you want more.
Yeah. And also, I'd say that alongside that, parallel with that, is that we're living in a culture and society which is encouraging impulsivity much more. So the social media platforms, the telephone, stuff like that, which is increasing distraction and increasing that sense of wanting to get an instantaneous change to one's mood is definitely there and alongside that. So, yeah, absolutely. I wonder also about the whole notion of communal eating as well. We eat alone a lot. Even when we're at work, we're eating alone at our table, aren't we? We're eating alone in front of our computer with our sandwiches and stuff like that, rather than the very social activity of joining a meal.
Well, and that's something that I certainly celebrate in France because they still see the value. And certainly, I mean, I haven't worked in Paris for a little while now, but I do remember that
Yeah,
parking at a parking meter over lunch and realizing that, if you put some money in the meter, um, I think it's about midday, it'll actually give you till about 3:30 because there are 2 hours free parking
sure.
over lunch. And there's an acknowledgement that it's not something that you do in front of your computer, and it is something that has a social value. And
Yeah.
we could get into the whole conversation about the destruction of community that we are witnessing, and how damaging, dreadfully damaging that is. So, um,
Well, we can certainly get into that conversation for sure. I mean, we're looking today, as you and I are chatting, there's some really awful scenes in Belfast at the moment of that sort of destructivity and conflict, intercommunal conflict flaring up again. And we've seen it on the streets of the UK now for some time. What's your take on the issue of the destruction of community? Where are you coming from on that one?
well, I suppose you can start at the door of social media.
Sure,
And it was apparently Zuckerberg, said, "Well, this is to bring people together," and actually, it has, with his direction, done exactly the reverse.
sure,
And the advent of computers and people staying at home and playing games, children playing games with somebody who lives next door, but they don't get together. They sit in their own rooms and play games that way. I think that's pretty desperate. But I think also the likes of austerity, which took away so much support for young people,
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
social clubs and
The youth
even
service was just stripped and gone, has gone, finished. Yeah.
and young people, particularly young men, need things to bring them together where they
Sure.
can learn and interact. And we really have killed uh, most of it,
Yeah.
and we are reaping the rewards of that, which is very, very bad.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we're seeing angry men on the streets, definitely. But also, I presume you're also talking about some of this stuff about the manosphere and boys at home on their own, going down that rabbit hole on their computers and
yeah,
on their phones.
yeah, you know, in all the indigenous peoples, uh, there are rites of passage. There are
Yeah,
ways in which both men and, well, boys and girls, but particularly boys, go through a rite of passage into manhood.
yeah,
And they are taught, they are looked after. I mean, the whole sense of you know, bringing up a child. In the past, there was the community. So if the mother had to go and do something, it wasn't just the nuclear family, but the wider family of next door neighbors and other good people would carry some of the weight
sure.
of caring for the child,
Yeah.
uh, and that's gone.
I
And
mean, for
th th
sure. And I don't want to just sound like an old fogey moaning about things, but I remember when me and my brother, when we were kids, we were out in Birmingham on the streets and we were out having fun. What would be happening would be that were known by neighbours, and they would be looking over us, and they thought there was a problem. They would get hold of our mum or our dad and let them know that we were at risk or something had happened. And that's what was happening with all the neighbours' kids were being looked at and monitored in a very gentle way in that way. But certainly that isn't the case now, I don't think.
no,
There isn't that sense of connection.
and there has been such an increase in the number of single mothers
Yeah,
who have typically no support whatsoever. And it's a horrendous situation. And of course, the children will bear the brunt of that as they grow up.
yeah,
Young boys without a male role model, and you're turning as you talked about the manosphere turning. You know, most gangs are populated
yeah.
by boys who are looking for a rite of passage. They don't understand it as that psychologically, but that's what they're looking for.
Sure.
Uh,
I mean,
and
I've worked with gang leaders in South London who literally will tell you this, that they're recruiting what they call youngers, and they will tell you all they're looking for is love, and I offer them that,
yeah,
and then they'll carry the drugs for me, they'll
yeah,
do the violence for me, etc., etc.
yeah.
And yeah, absolutely, it's 100%. It's looking for. I often say, I don't know what you think about this, but I often say we don't take care of our boys, somebody else would take them off us.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
we're seeing that.
absolutely. And this falls squarely at the short-sightedness of the political system in which we
Sure.
live, where they've just taken all the money and the support away, and then they, like all these things, they save a bit of money there and they end up spending them far more by dealing with the social ills and
Yeah.
problems that these things cause.
Always. You talked a bit about, or you mentioned this idea of austerity, and its impact. Would you be able to say more about that? What are you sort of your experience of living through that and the impact and what we're living with now because of that?
Hmm.
Try and
Uh,
do it in bullet points.
well, you know, it has created so much. It's one of the roots, the sort of the key root of inequality has been austerity. And the desperate thing is that most of the people who make the decisions around these things have not experienced it. They don't see the results of their dysfunctional decision making.
Yeah.
And you know, I think of the Marie Antoinette sort of quote, "Well, let them eat cake." It's uh, I think we're in a very dangerous situation now where the society has been so fractured by there's lots of things, of course, but if I can just say political cowardice. Um, I see that the defense minister has just resigned today,
Sure.
and he's done it because we've got a political leader who is incapable of making a brave but difficult decision.
Yeah.
And so, uh, the austerity has created so many people who are living on the breadline or below it. And uh, we're creating a society where there's more and more people who are disenfranchised. They
Sure.
don't have any opportunities in life,
Sure.
which leads to disaffection and hence the support for people like Reform and Restore, who just say all the right things to attract people who are extremely disaffected. I
Yeah.
was watching a program on Adolf Hitler on Channel 4. I just happened to turn it on last night, and it's
Yeah.
extraordinary the parallels with what's going on in this country and America to what happened in the late 20s and early 30s in Germany. And it's, you know, not not many people study history in that way now, and boy, they need to,
Yeah.
because we are creating a situation which is absolutely dire, and eventually people get pissed off, and then they do something about it. And I can't remember. There's a sort of a statistical measure on disaffection and the difference between the poorest in society and the richest, and giving it a number. I think that before the French Revolution, it was about 81, and in the States, it's now about 84. So it's like we are so ripe for people to actually turn to violence, real
Yeah.
violence. And the desperate thing about that is that it never works. And the
Mhm.
people who take over are normally because they're not skilled. They haven't had any training in taking charge of difficult situations. They actually just make it worse.
Yeah.
But they've all they do is eliminate a load of the people who created the first lot. But that it doesn't solve anything.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm so passionate about talking about the leaders that we've got today and what they've got to learn and how they've got to approach leadership, which is just not the way they're doing it.
Okay. So tell us how first you got into that field of looking at leaderships. I presume from your own personal experience of becoming a leader that, and then working in certain sectors. So tell us a little bit about that story, if you don't mind.
Mm. Well, I, I, the first factory, well, the first factory I worked in was my father's, and I was about 15 or something, and
So,
I saw him leading the factory, and I didn't remark particularly on it. I do remember breaking a drill in the afternoon when I got home. He already knew about it. I mean, I suppose it was probably easy for people to pass up to the boss that his son had made a mess of something, but he really was in touch with what was going on and really cared
hmm,
about what was happening in his factory and also how people were treated. And he was, as I learned later on, a very much loved leader. But I then went on into um, an engineering company in Hampton, and um, I saw good and not so good leadership
yeah,
there. I had to go up to Glasgow and set up a factory at a very early age, about 21, which was quite a challenge. So I had to learn a lot about unions and what was acceptable, particularly in Scotland. and when the pubs opened and when they
Yeah.
closed and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
all this kind of thing. But then I joined the Marines. It's a long story, but I joined as an officer and went through training, and then obviously had a lot of training in leadership, and spent 17 years there, and had two jobs where I was teaching leadership,
Yeah.
one at Dartmouth and one at Greenwich. So that when I came out, I trained as a coach, but I had all that experience. And then I did a master's degree in what they call the psychology of change, shorthand. And what really struck me there was that was a very humanistic program, and I came in having been trained to be sure. When you stand in front of a group of Marines and say, right, this is what we're going to do, they've got to trust you, they've got to follow you,
Yeah.
uh, and they've got to believe in you. So you've got to present a certain persona.
Yeah.
And when I did that on this humanistic program, I was let known in no uncertain terms that that was not acceptable.
Yeah.
And so I had to unlearn a lot of what I learned, put it to one side, and slowly over a period of time bring some of it back in appropriate moments.
Yeah.
Um, I've been teaching leadership and running leadership programs for 30, 34, something like years since I left the Marines.
Yeah.
And so I've seen an awful lot of executives from many sectors, and and also as we started this conversation, a lot of them still carrying the trauma that they un, under they experienced when they were very young, which they now use as the basis of the model for their leadership, which is why there's so much dysfunctional leadership around.
And it is in the nature of trauma, of course, that people don't want to look at it because it's too difficult and frightening. And so they form sort of psychological constructs that protect against that feeling. And that in itself is a like a difficult pathology to work with. In terms of like thinking about the armed forces, because I suspect people have a strange view of how they teach leadership in the armed forces. My understanding from other service personnel that I've worked with is that there is this notion of an esprit de corps, and one of the reasons why the British Armed Forces are successful is that it's very much about forming relationships between people as opposed to just brutalizing. You know, you would see these American films and people are screaming at you and all that. I'm sure there's a bit of shouting that goes on. I would be naive not to suggest it, but that fundamentally isn't what it's about in the armed forces. It's about creating teams and relationships and dependencies, is my understanding. Or am I wrong?
You're not wrong, but I think it's developed quite a bit from that
Yeah.
as well. The non-commissioned officers in the Marines now are taught EQ.
Yeah, absolutely.
We weren't at the time, but it's like the and I think the sort of the first experiences of Northern Ireland brought that about, where young lance corporals were going out with a couple of Marines, sort of in what used to call a brick of three people,
Yeah,
and coming across incidents and having to make decisions in the moment. There was no sort of calling on the radio and saying, "Hey, boss, this is happening. What do I do now?" No, the responsibility was clearly on their shoulders, and so um, the training really gravitated to empowerment and
yeah,
an understanding of what the outcomes were that
yeah,
were required under certain circumstances. And that's why we rehearsed and practiced and were out there exercising all the time when we weren't actually on um, uh, out there for real, so to speak. And one of the things that really struck me when I came out of the Marines and started working in the corporate world was how their leadership model was still what we expected from the military 50, 100 years
yeah,
earlier. And it really kind of really surprised me that, and still, we have lots of leaders who use this as the model for running their
Sure. I mean, a
departments or
lot of leaders are in
organizations.
position without training as well. I mean, it's one of the things is that the skills of rising to the top of an organization aren't necessarily the ones that are actually needed to run an organization. Sometimes they're the opposite, in my experience. But I don't want it to be unpolitical in your response there. Um, uh, you mentioned EQ, and there has been a growing movement, I think, in the world of leadership around understanding things like attachment styles, forming teams, working through support as opposed to fear, and understanding that the brain works better when it's not fearful. Put in very simple terms. If people are not afraid, they're more creative, they're more engaged, they're more able. And also, if you get teams of people working together, you had the famous experiment at the Volvo factory in Kalmar, in the town of Kalmar, which broke down the work processes into teams, small teams, and they produced incredibly high quality cars at a slightly lower rate than the other factories, but they were very desirable, and they reduce things like absenteeism and illness and all of that stuff, and those workers became ambassadors for the Volvo model, which has maintained its image around that stuff, and so it's had a long-term lasting effect on them. Have you seen a similar shift in leadership in general, would you say, in the field as you've been working in it? Have have the corporate world started to take on board EQ and team and motivation as something more than just like a tick box exercise?
Um, I think the experience is somewhat checkered.
Is it? Good.
Yeah, and the whole. I mean, this whole sort of disgust with woke, whatever woke really means,
Sure.
uh, and still, I'm not particularly political, but I see the influence of politics and the media so graphically now. And so when you have someone who does something wrong, there's this Dickensian attitude that we should shame them because that's the only way that we're going to have an effect on them. And um, it doesn't work.
Hmm.
It doesn't work.
Hmm.
And so uh, there are, of course, there's some very good leaders out there.
Yeah.
But with the allocation of resources towards training and equipping people to do the job that you want them to do is so reduced. Uh, it's fascinating. I was on a webinar with Ashridge the other day, and they were really talking about how amazing it was and how they'd done this big survey, and there were so many people who thought that learning was a really good thing, and they were allocated enough time for it. But the more senior you are, the more they felt that. And that's honestly that's not my experience.
Yeah.
In the corporate world today, I'm seeing a lot of organizations really pulling back because not, well, because I think one of the things is that the model that they have, the financial model particularly, which requires this um, disparity of levels of pay, to put it crudely,
Yeah.
is so enormous, and they're not prepared to compromise on that.
Yeah.
And the fact that organizations are so big now, um, they have a lot of power to manipulate actually the market and sort of there's it's always the small ones that they're getting um, squeezed out.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, I think at the same time, when you you phone up the electricity department, the board or whatever, uh, in the evening, which happened to my partner a little while ago. And she said, "We've got a power cut." And the person on the other end said, "No, you don't." And she said, "Well, there's no electricity here." And she said, "But my computer says that you've got a perfectly good supply." And it's like that you remember the old skit, the computer says no.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
we are like frogs in water that's slowly coming to the boil.
Yeah, I agree.
We are being so abused by systems,
Yeah,
and uh, and you know, I'm relating it back to what I was saying in terms of leadership. And what's going on in the corporate world. The corporate world has lost its soul
hmm,
in so many ways, which is why I talk about rewilding, because we've lost touch with nature. And so, yeah, as I said, yeah, there's some good companies out there, but frankly, there's an awful lot that are pretty awful,
sure, sure.
pretty
So
awful.
tell us more about this notion of rewilding, and where that's coming from in your experience, and what you think it has to offer.
Um, I, Well, at one level, you could say that nature's been around for 3.8 billion years, and it's actually had a while to sort out how to organize itself and
Yeah,
how to flourish. Where it doesn't flourish is where we've stuck an oar in and started to mess it up,
sure.
and we've done that in a multitude of ways, which is having knock-on effects which now are deeply affecting us as human beings and society. So what I sort of where they have uh, had rewilding projects, and the Knepp estate in Sussex is a kind of classic example because they started it 26 years ago. um, they were trying to work the earth, and it just wasn't working. They could not make. They had all the equipment that they needed, but it wasn't enough. They were losing money, and so they said, "Right, we'll tear down the fences. We'll just let nature get on with it." And they introduced some of the key um, species that originally would have lived on that land as close as they could. I mean, there aren't any wild boar now, but so they introduced a kind of pig. They put some wild ponies and some deer and uh, beavers and all sorts of things, and they just let them get on with it.
Yeah,
And what is amazing is how quickly nature begins to take over and to express this kind of wisdom and create spaces where everything thrives. Everything thrives, and
yeah,
creatures that they thought were pretty much extinct are now turning up there, and so on. And so I sort of thought, well, how can we apply that in the corporate world? And at a simple level, you could say, well, stop interfering. If you've got people you're a consultant. You called in to the CEO of the business, says, "Oh, we got this problem, and I want you to solve it." So I say, "Well, where's it manifesting?" "Oh, it's down there on the shop floor." But have you asked them? "No, no, no. They don't understand. This is beyond them." So the first thing is go down there and talk to people,
mhm,
find out what's going on. The people nearest the ground in these things often have by far the clearest view of what is happening. And almost always the problem that is presenting is not the problem that needs to be solved or addressed, because we're not looking at it systemically. If you look at it systemically, which is what nature does, works in complex systems, then you go back and you say, well, there's something over there. It doesn't look like it's related, but actually, if you really look at it, that's what's causing this problem over here.
right.
And we have that in the body. If you go to the doctor and say, "Look, I've got a really sore knee," and if he's not a good old-fashioned GP like I went to see the other day, who bless him wonderful guy. These people, they don't have the time. They say, oh, well, I'll give you a cream to put on your knee. And then you go back and you say it doesn't work, blah, blah. And they say, well, go to the surgeon. The surgeon, he knows what he's doing. He'll replace your knee or whatever. But actually, that hasn't really solved the problem, because the problem was that you've got one of your discs is out of line,
Sure.
and you've got had a reflected problem. So we need to be holistic in the way that we approach these things. Again, a lesson from nature.
Yeah.
So it's just taking this honoring of how nature does things, and then saying, how could that be in my environment? And one start point is actually to go out in nature, switch the bloody phone off,
Hmm.
and appreciate where you are
Hmm.
and what you're actually seeing, because there's messages all the time, but we're so busy and so much in a hurry that we forget all that.
Yeah. Hey,
We-
when you're talking, I'm thinking of those. I'm going to misquote it, but the sayings from Henry Ford. He's attributed to saying with his new industrial processes is building a car, saying I only need a certain number of people with a certain number of limbs.
yeah.
I can build this with people with one leg and two arms or one arm or whatever it was. I mean, it's sort of, I can't actually remember the quote. But that is so unnatural. That is extraordinarily unnatural. That it's about the machine and the production and the output in that sense, and then these mutilated humans producing it.
Yeah.
And what happens to the mutilated humans afterwards is like the question for me. So, okay, we've got a great car, but what about the mutilated humans? And
Well, yes.
often, and it is my experience that that at every levels of corporate sort of world at the moment, the levels of stress and distress exist, and the impact of that over decades of working within that system are horrific, sort of like literally. And so I agree with you. Something does have to change, and there is a sense in which why should we reinvent the wheel when there are systems that already work, and there are really good examples. On a practical way, if I was to bring you into, let's say, I ran a mega corporation, I don't, and I don't want to. Like, let's just make that clear. But let's say I did. I was worried about sort of what's happening, and I would bring you in as a consultant. Where do you think you would start with that?
Um, well, the first thing I mean, firstly, I'd thank him for his open-mindedness
Yeah,
to have the
absolutely.
conversation.
Yeah,
But then I'd want to walk the floor. I'd want to walk around. I'd like to understand the problem
yeah,
as they saw it presenting.
yeah,
And then I would want to go around and talk to people and listen to them. And it's a tricky job, because when you go and talk to people, very often they're so relieved that someone is actually
yeah.
talking to them and listening, they'll give you a story which is actually not quite right.
Right.
Because and another thing, they want to put it all out there because they're just so frustrated
Sure.
that they're not being listened to. But I mean, that's the place to start, is to go and talk to people
Sure.
and observe. I wrote a paper a long time ago on the energy in organizations and how much you can learn by just sitting in the reception area,
Yes.
but not actually going any further than that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with that, definitely. That's often where you get a sense of what's going on. It's certainly the first contact point. Um,
Yes.
my experience is that a lot of these dysfunctional systems operate because they're born of, and coming back to our earlier conversation, they're born of fear of whatever they're afraid of. And therefore, the idea is that these systems try to produce containment of them, but the
Yes.
systems obviously don't. They
Yes.
produce more fear. There's an old theorist, dead now, but was an army bloke as well from World War One, who talked about the role of leadership in containing fear, that the role of leadership in giving direction helps complex groups of people under stress manage their fear much more effectively than an actually he was a tank commander in World War One, and he was referring to the fear inside tanks and how a leader, an effective leader, could reduce anxiety under the most distressing of situations.
And that is yes, it's a paradoxical thing that you raise there in a sense
Yeah,
because so many people look to the leader to give them the reassurance that it's all okay.
yeah,
And that's where we are in the political world at the moment, which is why still so many people will vote for Donald Trump, is because they say, well, he's got his faults, but at least he takes decisions and
exactly.
he leads with a forcefulness.
Yeah,
And my sense is that actually we need now leaders who understand themselves and can manage their own state in such a way that if they're in front of a group of people, the group of people, he's not, um, he's not faking it. He really is in charge of his own state, but at the same time, he's encouraging them to be in charge of their state,
yeah,
and he's not encouraging he or she, is not encouraging them to look to him or her
yeah.
for this leadership, which is just an ego
So
need.
rescuing is not leadership, obviously. But coming back, I mean, you made a point earlier on, and I wonder if you want to say something more about it. We're getting to the point where we need to think about ending, but thinking about Keir Starmer, for example, one of the analyses I have, he's a very competent administrator, clearly. He really knows his stuff, but he seems to be withholding as a human being and there's a lot of anger projected at him. That there's something missing about him as a leader, which I would say is about his authenticity and his decisiveness. He's much more of a sort of an organizational geek, and he's brilliant at it. He's quite clearly brilliant at that stuff. He took the Labour Party and has turned them into an electable force again. Very clever. He's been brilliant on the international stage, etc. But at home, he fails to provide that containment of the fear and anxiety that people are experiencing at the moment. Um, Not him as a person, but that leadership style. If you were to give him some tips on UK, corporate UK, what would be some of the things you might advise him?
Well, I'd be curious as to where his fear comes from,
Right.
because he's
That's
clearly
great. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
motivated
yeah.
by fear. It's crippling him.
It is. Yeah,
I would say, and I would encourage him to surround himself with people who don't agree with him,
yeah,
and then have the openness to acknowledge that these are complex situations and simple binary solutions are completely inappropriate.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so that would be a start point.
I think he does lack courage, but he's gotten rid of some of the people who do have courage, which is really problematic. So people like Jess Phillips and so on, who are very courageous people, have gone, and that's to the detriment of. Um, on that note, leadership obviously isn't an individual. That's one of the points that you're making. Leadership is a style, it's a corporate approach. What would you see as for you, the elements of if you get to choose, mix it all up and you get to choose all the different elements of what makes good leadership rather than in a person, but what would be the elements or characteristics or values, etc., of your ideal good leadership?
Well, I've been talking a lot about it in the last sort of 2 weeks. One is humility,
Yeah,
um, because people who are humble have whether they've been trained in it or not, a way of managing their ego.
yeah,
That's one. Curiosity is another.
yeah,
If you're curious, particularly around people who disagree with you, that actually can be amazing.
Yeah.
Um, and giving time to listen. I suppose that part of curiosity, really, but um, I think so many leaders are so busy, so much under pressure, and I don't want to underplay just how challenging it is running a corporation.
Yeah.
It's incredibly difficult,
Yeah.
but a lot of people at that level make it more difficult for themselves rather than easier.
Yeah. It's been lovely to talk to you, Tom. It's very refreshing. It's really refreshing to be able to have a chat like this about what's going on in the real world
Yes.
and real world solutions. I definitely agree with the notion of rewilding. There is so much fear and anxiety around. We've lost the ability to just trust that if we get the system right, it'll work. You
Yeah.
know, we're stuck in a negative system at the moment, and we need to break out of it into much more healthy systems, whatever they are, whatever
Mm,
terms are used. I think of a virtuous circle. We're in a vicious cycle at the moment, and we need to move into a virtuous circle. And whatever
indeed.
can make that flip is really welcome.
Mm,
And
mm.
it's been lovely to have you on. Where can people get hold of your book?
Oh, well, it's on Amazon is
Right.
the easiest place. You can go to a bookstore if you object.
Those really ancient, old-fashioned things.
Well, because some people have said I won't I won't use Amazon. I mean, I have come across that. So go to your bookstore and ask them to stock it. Um, is is the answer to that one.
Great,
Um,
great,
it's on Kindle as well, and
super.
when I've managed to organize myself, that it'll also be on Audible, but it's not there yet.
Right.
But it's on softback and hardback and on Kindle.
And if people want to get hold of you to come in and give a talk or do some consultancy, have you got a website they can get you through?
Serenityinleadership.com.
Serenityinleadership.com. Great,
And if you write to me, Tom Thom at Serenity and Leadership, you'll get me. And LinkedIn. I've got an Instagram thing and so on as well. But
great.
uh, LinkedIn, I have very good conversations there, and I would love to hear from people. Do you think what everything I've said is a load of rubbish, or do you think, wow, that's different? And it's great to hear where people are with this because the manifestations of leadership today really are quite problematic, and
Yes.
I'd love to help, really.
And some of them are much more problematic than others, quite
Oh,
frankly.
the number of people
On
who
the world
contact me.
stage at the moment, it's like quite
Oh,
worrying.
yes, yes, yes. The
So,
number of people who contact me from the NHS
yeah,
is unbelievable, and they feel
that's another
so
show.
powerless.
What's
It, it,
happened in the NHS is another show. We'll
it
have to stop there
breaks
because
your
that
heart.
is another show.
Yeah,
Like the shift in management styles is a disaster in that organization.
yeah.
Tom, great to have you on. Really super. Really enjoyed the conversation. You stay there, folks. I hope you've enjoyed this. And actually, you tell me, do you think Tom is just mad as a hatter or is he on point? I'd like to know as well. I think he's on point, but maybe you think he's a box of frogs croaking away. I don't know. It'd be lovely to hear from you. Thanks for joining us, and I'll see you all at the next show. So bye bye for now.